So here we are with the first step whenever I'm actually putting any of these things down on and mounting them onto the jersey for me is always the arm numbers, whether they go up in the shoulder or whether they're down here actually on the sleeve itself. That's where I'm starting for me, because it's so much easier to get these small letters, or excuse me, these small numbers out of the way. Do those first, and then from there progress on to the bigger numbers on the back. So usually I'm starting with the numbers. I might do, in either order, it doesn't really matter, the numbers that go on the sleeves, and then any captain or ultimate patches, cup patches, specialty patches, any of those in any order, I'll put those on first just to make it much easier, because once you have the crest of the jersey plus the if you have double digit numbers, once you start getting multiple numbers put on the back of the jersey, you're just making it worse and worse on yourself, trying to finagle that jersey through the sewing machine. If you've got just a home machine, you don't got much room to play with there, especially if you've got, as I chatted with some people the other day, these Glacier twill kits are so heavy. Once you get the back numbers on there, it's nearly impossible to kind of fold the jersey over on itself and the number over on itself to fit and do things properly without messing up. So small numbers, patches on the front, do those first, and then go progress onto the stuff on the back. Usually I save the nameplate for last. As far as placement on these, I'll say that multiple times during this video. Always look up game-worn photos. There's no substitute. I'm not looking anywhere else. Even if you can't find, sometimes there's going to be players you can't find. I'm looking up game-worn auctions from any player in the same season on the same team. If you can get guys, maybe you've got a guy that's got similar numbers, so instead of Crosby, maybe there's a guy in the team that's 78 instead of 87. If for whatever reason you can't find a Crosby jersey in an auction, maybe you can find number 78, and you got really good photo reference of that, so you can see where the 7 and 8 roughly kind of match up. You can do the same thing on the sleeves. So that's what I did here. I've got a game-worn photo of this 2001-2002 Mario Gamer. And from there, it's very simple. Kind of how I'll discuss here with placement of patches on the front in a bit with the captain patches or the cut patches. You might get a little bit of a different feel for this just because at least for me, I'm a smaller guy, size 46, 48, 50, something like that. So my sleeves are going to be slightly different. But for these, I'm basically just kind of lining them up using the game-worn photos, getting them as close here to the edge as makes sense. So whenever I flip and kind of spread out the sleeve, I'm not going to get too big of a gap here in the center. And then I'm just looking as far as like placement here. These ones, rather than some of the other areas where I use known measurements for these arm numbers, again, just for myself, if you want to use a known measurement that you can kind of place from somewhere else in game-worn photos, usually what I'm doing here is trying to match the general look and feel of how much space there is between this seam here and the top of the number, and then in this case on this jersey, the next area of significance, which happens to be this gold stripe, trying to match roughly the same general gaps between the top and the bottom of the numbers, and then the next seam that comes on the sleeve. So I use the temporary adhesive, spray this down, get this into place, sew it down, and then from there what I'm actually going to do is take the jersey, and once that first number is placed, open the sleeve and lay it flat like this, because it makes placing the next number much easier. You don't have to guess. Once you get the next number sewn down, you place this one, sew it down, that's ready to go, and then this one just follows suit. You just match the exact same placement across the middle seam there, and then now we can sew down this next one. So as far as mounting the back numbers in the nameplate and such, I've already got an example here already pre-laid out. I've not sewn anything down yet, not mounted it. But I've got one here pre-set up just to kind of give you a really good example. of how this should look. Honestly, the best example or the best advice that I could give is always looking up game used jersey example photos on the internet, whether it's game worn auction websites, classic auctions, whatever. There's a bunch of different auction houses out there that leave their jersey auction history up, so they're easy to find. Search for the player, the year that you want. You might get lucky, you might not. Even if you can't find the exact player you're looking for, I even try to find players from the same year just to get general placement information. Beyond that, I'll kind of flash up on the screen here a couple of images of this exact Lemieux game worn jersey from 2001, 2002. You can kind of see that I used as reference. So that's my first stop. I always have that. I'm always referencing that. And then beyond that, the next biggest piece of advice I can give is always utilizing something that you know a known value for. And by that, I mean what I actually did here in one case to help myself really space all this out was use the measurement of this coho lettering way up at the top. And took my little fabric tape measure, measured that. I'll probably throw up an image of this on the video as well, overlaid. I measured out the height of that, which ended up being, take a look here. Basically like 3/8 in height for just the coho lettering itself. So I took that, and then the game worn photo that I found online, I took into Photoshop, and then took the measurement of the coho lettering, made another little block overlay just for a measurement in Photoshop. And then I figured out from there what my actual distance would be between the top of the numbers and then the bottom of the letters here on the nameplate. And once I got it inside of Photoshop, I figured out that the distance here from the edge of number to edge of number was basically double the height of the coho letter. And then from the top of the letter or top of the number to the bottom of the letter here was a little over 2 times the height. So that roughly equated out to about 7/8 of an inch. And then that's just how I laid it all out. But that gave me measurements, but they didn't actually give me exact placement of anything just yet. So first place I would recommend to always start is to take your nameplate. And what we're going to want to do there is you want to measure, and I know this is black, so it's kind of hard to see. Basically, you want to measure from this seam here, where the arm meets the body, and measure all the way across. And this is where you're going to have these fabric tape measures, and then these bigger, larger rulers that I had touted in one of the earlier videos. These will really come into handy because they're going to help you lay out exactly how everything's laying on top of one another. So first step here is just to measure from corner to corner where those seams are at, and we're looking at 21.5 inches. So to do the quick math there, that's 10 3/4 of an inch is the middle point of where I need my name bar to be at. And we're already dead on right here. So not only the middle of the name bar, what I also like to do is just measure the letters themselves to make sure that they're centered up. Because sometimes you might get a name bar that's not perfectly cut. And so we just want to make sure that we get the letters here measured as well, which is about 14.5 inches. So that's going to give me 7 1/4. And that lines up exactly the same spot. So I'm good here. So from here, I've got my name bar set up. As I said earlier in the clip of this video, the order in which you want to do these, and normally I try to do them all in order of size. So as we talked about already, I have not done it yet, but what I would start out with are the name or the numbers that go on the shoulders on the or the arms. So I'll start there. Actually measure those out, mount one, sew that down, mount the other one on the other side of the flip of the sleeve, sew that down. Do both arms, get those out of the way, because if you start here with these bigger numbers, you're just going to have a bunch of stuff that you're fighting with as you're trying to, especially if you have a smaller, just a home sewing machine, you're going to be fighting those numbers the entire way. So get the numbers that are on the sleeves out of the way first, And then from there is when I come in and I start doing one number at a time. So I'll do this whole process like I have right now, where I lay out everything on the back, get the name bar centered, and then from there I've already got my measurements that I calculated from Photoshop earlier. Measure out from edge to edge on the letters to the number. Those are good. And good again. And I'm basically just going to try and measure a couple of spots all the way across, just to make sure that I don't have the numbers kind of crooked or cockeyed or anything. From there, then, now that I've got the height, I've also got the same measurement that I've already pre-calculated for the width between the numbers, and that also matches up at the bottom, and the top is just slightly, nope, the top's fine too. So we're good here. You can measure across, try to pick an easy spot to measure. So here's another seam here at the bottom of the arm where it connects to the body, and measure there as well. And from the left seam to the edge of the first number on the 6 is 5 1/8. And if I measure from the other side here, 1, 2, 3, 5, and I'm ever so slightly off, but honestly, on these measurements down here, I'm not too concerned. I mean, honestly, again, if you reference some of the game-worn photos that you'll see on the auction sites, I've said this before, and I'll never change my opinion on this. As collectors, we care way more about perfect placement of letters and numbers than the customizers for the team ever do. They try to get close, but man, the quality of the stitching, it's quality stitching. The numbers aren't going to go anywhere, but the perfection of the stitching around the numbers, that they don't necessarily care about. The perfection of letters being perfectly centered on a jersey, they don't care about. They get it close. I doubt they even measured out like we are right here. This is just because I'm a perfectionist and I want it to look really good for my collection. The people that are customizing these jerseys for the teams aren't that perfect. They probably lay this out, they probably get something really close, eyeball it, heat press it down, sew it around, and it's done. But obviously, again, we're all a bit more perfectionists than that, so we're going to want to measure these things out. But a couple of key things to keep in mind. Again, this is a black jersey. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but right here is where my fight strap is at. Don't ever measure your jerseys based on the fight strap. That's another thing. Whenever the jersey companies are manufacturing these, that fight strap has a tendency to kind of move around all over the place. So it's not always going to be perfectly centered. So don't worry if your numbers are kind of sewn over to the top of the reinforcement area. It is what it is. Same thing can be said even up here at the top. Like, I don't really, if I kind of measure this back out again, you might be able to see that. So 10 3/4 is right there, and just over the middle point of that eye. But yet here's the seam right here up at the top over the shoulders, where like your collar opens up and it meets at the back of the jersey. That also doesn't necessarily center up on the jersey. These aren't perfectly manufactured items. They kind of have some oddities here and there, which is why I say don't try and perfectly align everything down here, like measuring from corner to corner here or corner to corner there. You'll get close, and usually as long as I'm within a couple of 1/8, I'm okay with that. But really, it's all utilizing those game-worn photos, utilizing your measurements here, starting with your name bar, get that centered first, and then once your name bar is ready and placed first, then I can place each number after that and kind of plan out where I want some things. And this is, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, this is where this comes in handy, because now I can just lay this down and just make sure that if I pick a spot on the jersey to kind of lay out this large ruler at, I can kind of make sure, and that lines up really well. Nothing is too far off center. Everything, I already know that the measurement here is lining up. Just want to make sure everything's kind of even across the bottom. I might want to tweak it a little bit, but overall it's very good. I can do the same thing up here. I can just lay this ruler on the bottom of my letters, and everything is perfectly lining up on the same spots on this ruler as I look through it at the top of the numbers. So good to go. Once I have these both of these numbers mounted, sewn all the way around, then the last step usually for myself, just because it could go either way. I could see sewing down the nameplate first. I could see sewing down the nameplate second. I usually do it second after both of the numbers on the back are done, just because that's not as precision work as trying to sew around the edge of these numbers. You're just sewing around the edge straight lines with the nameplate, so that's usually not as big of a deal to me, and that's why I usually save it for last, because if a mistake were to be made, I'd rather make it around the edge of a nameplate, which you'll never see, than see the stitch work around the edge of the number, which you're definitely going to see. So here is the example that I had whenever I mentioned Malkin. Obviously, Lemieux is super easy to do. It's double 6. Grassy's going to be the same way, double 9s. The numbers basically match up. They're easy. You center them on the back. It is what it is. The numbers are going to naturally line up. The middle of them, the gap between the two numbers on the back, are going to line up centered with the nameplate itself. In case of somebody like Malkin, where he's got 7 and 1, the 7 is going to be drastically wider than the 1 itself, so it's not going to line up perfectly with the center of the nameplate. And when I say that, I mean the distance. What you want to do is measure the distance of the number itself from edge to edge. And in this case, I even need to go a step further and not just go from here to here, but I need to go from and take into account the total width of the number entirely. So I should really measure here at the bottom and go from the edge to the edge on the bottom, and it's roughly 12 and 3/8 inches. So I would want to measure that, take that measurement, and center the numbers over the Malkin name on the back. And the middle point, that's 10 and a half, so I've got to have 5 1/4, which is right here. So there you can see, like, there's your midpoint on the number, or on the nameplate rather, and that's roughly where you're lining up with the double number beneath it. So always keep that in mind. You don't want to center the gap between the numbers on the nameplate. You want to center the width of the numbers together. And again, keep in mind, you want to take the maximum width. So in this case, based on the design of the numbers themselves, I want to go from maximum edge to maximum edge, and just realize that some areas are going to look kind of goofy, like right here, where it's a little bit narrower. So at the top, it might not look like it's actually lined up, because the edge of your 7 sticks out beyond the M, but the edge of the 1 sticks out nearly not at all from the N. But you've still got all of this area to play with down here, which does extend out. Roughly, this is a jersey that I bought pre-lettered from Ice Jerseys years ago, but this should basically be centered from edge here to the N, and the edge here extending out beyond the M. So I got all the way through the jersey, and one thing I realized I didn't really talk about was placement of, let's say, Stanley Cup final patches, or alternate or captain patches. Again, this is pretty straightforward. Go to find a game worn photos, and it should make it pretty simple. The one thing I do remember talking about with people recently, and somebody directly contacted me not too long ago, asking me how I came up with measurements for placing things like this. Told them just what I said here in these videos. Look up the game worn photos, and I just kind of estimate. Take a known element here. You can use the Penguin jersey, or the Penguin crest. That's really easy. Measure out a section, maybe it's the glove, and just figure out roughly how far away the patches should be. The one problem that you do have here is, at least for myself, when you get into some of the smaller sizes, I'm a pretty small guy, where 46s to 50. The placement, it's going to be up to you where you want the placement to be. I prefer that they match the placement here compared to the crest, rather than worrying about how much space is between the collar and the edge of the patch, and then the edge of the patch and the seam over here on the sides of the arm. For myself, I'd much rather figure out where the patch lands in coordination with, in this case, the edge of the triangle on the penguin, the background of the penguin on the right hand side, and then again over here, like for the 2016 patch, it comes down to this little point at the base of the cup patch. Where does that line up with, again, the edge of the golden triangle over here on the left-hand side? I don't concern myself with kind of like how we talked about in the back side, mounting the letters and the numbers. It's not worth, in my opinion, worrying over where this patch falls in relationship to that seam. All the player jerseys are 4 sizes bigger than mine, usually, so I can't worry myself with that seam. That is what it is. The distance here is what it is. I'd much rather have this line up, the distance here be accurate, and then the distance vertically and left to right where this falls in coordination with the logo itself on the crest. So that's how I do that. Otherwise, I think we talked about everything that there is with the mounting, and then here in the next couple of videos, we'll actually start getting into some sewing stuff.